I knew the moment Ethan Brooks ripped the laminated emergency grid schematic off the operations wall that everything was about to unravel. That chart had been our lifeline through countless crises, hurricane-force winds that knocked out lines across Georgia, substation explosions during summer peaks, even the brutal ice storm back in 18 when half the city lost heat and we rerouted power manually for 36 straight hours. But Ethan, with his perfectly styled hair, startup bro smile, and endless supply of buzzword slides, saw it as ancient history. He held up his sleek tablet like it was the new gospel and announced to the room, "This relic is obsolete. We've got AI predictive analytics now. Self-optimizing, real-time load balancing. The grid will practically run itself." It took every ounce of restraint not to laugh bitterly or shout at the fresh-faced intern trailing behind him. I'd kept this Atlanta metropolitan grid stable through 12 brutal summers of triple-digit heat, endless political fights over budgets, and years of deferred maintenance that left us patching together an aging Frankenstein of old SCADA systems, custom firmware hacks, and carefully balanced manual overrides. I didn't babysit, as Ethan liked to sneer. I stabilized chaos. Relationships mattered here. Trust chains built over years between operators, field crews, and even the federal regulators who signed off on our protocols. But Ethan didn't want stability. He wanted disruption. The kind that looked impressive in quarterly reports and impressed the board with flashy dashboards. If you could see the tension building that day on the ops floor, you'd feel it too, the slow simmer of unease among the veteran techs who exchanged glances when Ethan waved off questions about legacy compatibility. I wasn't even supposed to witness that particular humiliation. I'd only ducked into the control room to retrieve a USB drive after running voltage simulations earlier that morning. Ethan was giving a polished tour to procurement executives, all suits and skeptical nods. Probably shopping for the vendor promising seamless AI integration and a slick interface that would revolutionize everything. He pointed right at my still-warm workstation, cluttered with diagnostic printouts I hadn't archived yet, and declared, "Roles like this entire position will be fully automated by the end of the quarter." I stood frozen with my coffee cooling in my hand, watching my 12 years of institutional knowledge get casually erased and replaced by a QR code for Etherflow AI Beta. No warning, no transition plan, no acknowledgement of the hard-coded biometric overrides, retina scans, and multi-signature trust anchors that still bore my name, Marcus Hale, across critical switching trees and failover modules. Those weren't just code. They were safeguards required by Department of Energy standards, layered with federal audits and continuity verifications that couldn't be casually reassigned. I kept my expression neutral, the way I always did in high-stakes moments. People like Ethan saw optics, not the invisible web of dependencies. The grid wasn't wires and algorithms alone, it was human intuition layered over physics, load curves, and those quiet relationships that kept things from collapsing. I nodded politely to Lena at the front desk on my way out, her sad eyes telling me she already sensed the storm coming. In my mind, though, the clock was already ticking towards 6:17 p.m., that dangerous window when the sun dipped. Temperatures lingered in the high 90s, and millions in Atlanta flipped on air conditioners, ovens, and chargers all at once. The forecast had been brutal. Record heat, humidity thick as soup, zero breeze. Margins were razor-thin because Ethan had paused critical firmware updates for vendor alignment reviews. Switching lags at Substation 7 remained unpatched. The AI might flag anomalies, but Ethan dismissed those as noise. He believed the machine learning models could outsmart 2 decades of field-tested patches and operator gut feelings. I didn't need to sabotage anything. The real gift I left was a single casual remark as I exited the tour. Pay close attention around 6:17 when the evening AC surge hits. He chuckled, dismissing me like an old-timer lecturing millennials about rotary phones. But I documented everything: timestamps, version logs, notes on unchanged override anchors, federal compliance clauses requiring biometric recertification for any trust reassignments. Ethan wanted to eliminate redundancy? Fine. Let's see what happened when the system reached for a fallback that no longer existed because the human anchor had been cut loose. That afternoon, back at my modest bungalow in Decatur, the weight of the humid air pressed down like a warning. I sat on the porch with iced tea, watching the sky turn hazy orange, replaying Ethan's all hands where he'd praised the new interface that I'd quietly stress-tested behind the scenes. He'd never asked who built the original trust hierarchies or why certain cascade routines still required my specific clearance. The AI hummed smoothly now, but it was blind to the missing limb, the biometric key tied exclusively to me, untransferable without a full federal audit that took weeks. By late afternoon, the heat index climbed past 105. Dispatch braced for spikes. But the veterans knew the patterns. Fractional lags could cascade if not caught early. I imagined Ethan in the conference room with blinds drawn, consultants nodding enthusiastically about smart shedding and dynamic throttling, while ignoring questions about emergency manual paths still governed by legacy trust chains. One senior tech later told me how Ethan waved off concerns about distributed failover registries still anchored to human credentials. "It'll adapt," he'd said with that confident grin. But adaptation fails when the system hits a hard-coded wall. The calendar invite hit my inbox like a quiet bomb, no subject. Just my name and Ethan's office at 9 a.m. Sharp. He didn't do subtlety. Past firings had been swift. Cardboard box by lunch. Badge deactivated. I left my coffee mug on the desk. Login session open. Pretending normalcy, even though we both knew this was the end. His office reeked of designer cologne and overconfidence. Ethan didn't glance up. Just tapped his screen like clearing a minor annoyance. "The grid is essentially autonomous now. We no longer require hands-on oversight for your former responsibilities. No gratitude for the overnight shifts. The heatwave triage calls at 3 a.m. The fact that my biometric token was embedded in statewide load transfer approvals. Just a curt nod to the two security personnel waiting discreetly behind me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the warm badge, and placed it on his desk without a word. His satisfied smirk said it all. He thought he'd unplugged a bottleneck. As I turned to leave, I offered one final warning. Watch the 6:17 window when residential AC demand peaks. His confused laugh followed me down the hall. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out." Outside, the Atlanta morning already felt oppressive. I drove home slowly, past the familiar substations, knowing the system still carried my ghost. Override anchors unchanged. Federal Clause 9C requiring certified trusted systems architects for peak event interventions. Ethan believed the AI could handle it all, but the registry hadn't updated. Failover authorization remained locked to my profile. I spent the day logging notes, archiving evidence quietly. Not for revenge, but for the record. The grid wasn't code alone. It was accumulated judgment, listening to transformer hums, cross-checking AI flags against analog readings, knowing instinctively when a 0.3-second lag between Substation 7 and the Western relays meant impending cascade failure. Ethan praised predictive heat maps in board meetings, but he'd never endured a real event where intuition saved the day. By noon, the city baked. Weathermen hyped the record heat. At home, I watched the clock, the tension coiling like a spring. Around 3:14 p.m., Substation 7A flagged elevated draw. Minor blip, but the AI adjusted margins predictively. Ethan called it flexing. By 3:31, switching lags appeared at 2 more nodes, delays invisible on the glossy dashboard but catastrophic if unaddressed. Internal teams noticed patterns by 3:47, load jitter across zones. Normally, balancing scripts would redirect precisely, but the trust chain failed to validate. An engineer attempted manual simulation. Authorization denied. Missing anchor. A ticket was filed while Ethan zoomed stakeholders about unprecedented stability. At 4:58, Ethan finally checked dispatch, told about non-communicating backups. He leaned in confidently. The system's adjusting. That's the beauty of AI. No one contradicted him aloud, but glances were exchanged. One tech quietly opened my old binder of handwritten protocols. By 5:12, AC units ramped aggressively as the heat curve climbed. Still within tolerance, Ethan claimed in a mayor's office brief. Internally, however, Protocol 9C attempted initiation at 5:26, shifting northern surplus to western demand, but failed, reaching for a retina-keyed routine tied to my inactive status. The AI began looping by 5:39, pinging for validation every 10 seconds. Denied. Denied. The system didn't crash immediately. It waited patiently for the missing human response that Ethan had eliminated. As the sun lowered, the draw intensified. By 5:44 p.m., someone attempted the emergency manual load shift, a genuine, non-drill command. The command line rejected it. Insufficient credentials. Trust certificate expired. Panic rippled through the room. Ethan arrived. Ty Askew. Barking orders to override manually. Teams tried. But the secure module I'd authored years ago, when leadership demanded human fallback for high-draw events, enforced multi-layer verification. Legal. Compliance. Federal signatures required. By the time they dug into the protocol archive and found my sealed note, use only if primary unavailable, the layers proved insurmountable without proper clearances. Jared, no. Ethan demanded spoofing. Not legally. And not before 6:17, came the reply. Silence fell heavy. The realization dawned. This wasn't random failure, but protocol behaving exactly as designed. Assuming competent succession that never happened. Calls to regulators began too late. The DOE contact was unreachable. Backup required in-person biometric validation, days away. The AI continued pinging my name every 28 seconds. A digital ghost seeking its anchor. At 6:02 p.m., the control room reeked of ozone and fear. Ethan stood gripping a chair, watching the load curve surge. We're at 96% draw, someone reported. A junior tech muttered the critical threshold. 97% in any zone could trigger cascade. Ethan adjusted his collar. We need to prepare a statement, but 6:16 arrived, and no one spoke. The city exhaled collectively, doors opening. Thermostats cranked. Sweat-soaked shirts discarded as millions sought relief from the oppressive heat. At precisely 6:17 p.m., the surge hit like a sledgehammer. AC units across Metro Atlanta roared alive simultaneously. Demand punched through 97% tolerance in seconds. Microsecond delays compounded into misalignment. Load failed to reroute. One transfer tripped. Then chains followed. Lights flickered downtown. Then died in waves, blocks. Neighborhoods. Entire zones plunging into darkness. Traffic signals froze. Elevators trapped passengers. Hospitals switched to reserves. But outdated logic under new conditions failed at Grady Memorial. NICU staff manually ventilated infants amid rising temperatures. Calls flooded in. Utility partners. Mayor's office. Even a senator's staff. Dashboards flashed. Response unavailable. Override missing. At 6:23, the secure DOE line rang. The regulators' clipped voice demanded, "Where is Marcus Hale?" They knew the system had followed its own rules. Ethan stammered about personnel changes and modernization. The response was icy. Prepare full logs. Senate Energy Committee incoming. The room descended into dread as sirens wailed outside and auxiliary power hummed faintly. By 7:45 p.m., Ethan faced the press podium, sweat-soaked, fielding accusations of federal compliance breach from personnel gaps. A leaked internal memo named the issue: failure to maintain certified architects during contingency windows per Clause 9C. Headlines exploded. At 8 p.m., a notification arrived. Marcus Hale appointed Executive Director of Grid Stability at Apex Infrastructure Partners, effective immediately. No drama. Just recognition that experience couldn't be automated away. Ethan's resignation followed quietly. Subpoenas flew. Audits exposed the hubris of replacing stewards with dashboards. New protocols mandated multi-key continuity and legacy support. I never returned to the old room. My new team rebuilt from fundamentals, layered redundancies, respected automation with human anchors restored thoughtfully. The failed system powered down with a final log, failsafe initiated per Clause 9C. The blackout taught a harsh lesson: technology amplifies human decisions. But when pride dismisses the wisdom embedded in legacy safeguards, physics and timing exact their price. We sat in the dark not because the grid failed us, but because we failed to honor what kept it alive, the quiet expertise that can't be fired without consequence. What would you do if your city's lights depended on a trust you casually discarded? The question lingers long after the power returns.